The rain in Seattle doesn't clean anything. It just makes the dirt heavier, turning the soil into a thick, sucking paste that clings to your boots and your soul. I was on my knees in the flower bed behind the guest cottage, my quarters, as my daughter-in-law, Jessica, insisted on calling them. The mud was cold, seeping through the knees of my trousers, chilling joints that were already stiff with arthritis and old shrapnel. I dug frantically, my fingers clawing at the wet mulch, ignoring the tremors in my hands. These hands had once dismantled unexploded ordnance in the Aishau Valley. They had held the hands of dying boys in the Mekong Delta. They had been steady enough to thread a needle in the dark. But today, they shook. Not from age, not from Parkinson's. They shook from a rage so cold it burned like ice against my skin. 10 minutes ago, I had been sitting by the window, reading a book I'd read a dozen times, when I saw her, Jessica. She was walking toward the large green recycling bins by the garage, holding something rectangular and framed. I knew that frame. I had built it myself out of cherry wood in 1975. I watched, frozen, as she lifted the shadow box high above her head and brought it down hard against the side of the plastic bin. Crack. The sound of the glass shattering was sharp, violent, and final. She didn't look angry. She didn't look emotional. She looked bored. She shook the frame, dislodging the contents into the mud below, wiped her hands on her designer jeans as if she had touched something filthy, and walked back inside to pour herself another glass of Chardonnay. I am 78 years old. I am Sergeant Major Thomas Mack McAllister, U.S. Army, retired. I spent 30 years serving a country that promised to take care of me, only to end up living in the backyard of a son who is too afraid of his wife to look me in the eye. I dug. The mud sucked at my fingers. I found a shard of glass first, slicing my thumb. I didn't feel it. Then I found it. The silver star. It was caked in filth. The ribbon, once pristine red, white, and blue, was torn and stained brown. I picked it up. I wiped it on my shirt, smearing the mud but revealing the metal star beneath. I found the purple hearts next, buried under a rotting begonia. And finally, the photograph. The black and white image of my platoon, taken 3 days before the ambush that killed half of them.
The water had already soaked into the paper, blurring the faces of men whose names I still whispered in my sleep. I clutched the muddy star to my chest, the metal cold against my skin, and let out a sound that wasn't quite a sob and wasn't quite a scream. It was the sound of a man realizing his legacy had been designated as garbage. I sat there in the rain, wiping mud off a medal that cost me 3 of my best friends, while the woman inside laughed at a reality TV show. She thought I was just a senile old man taking up space. She didn't know she was declaring war on the wrong soldier. If you believe that respect is something you earn, not something you throw in the trash, if you believe that a man's history shouldn't be erased by someone else's greed, hit that subscribe button. Because I picked up that medal, and I decided right then the retreat was over. I stood up. My knees popped. My back ached. But I walked to the main house with a stride I hadn't used in 20 years. I didn't knock. I opened the back door and walked into the kitchen. I was dripping wet, tracking mud onto her pristine white carpets. Jessica was on the sofa in the living room, her feet up on the ottoman. She looked up, startled by the intrusion, her face twisted into a mask of annoyance. She snapped, "What are you doing? You're ruining the rug." "You threw them away," I said. My voice was low. It was the voice I used when the perimeter was breached. I held up the muddy silver star. She rolled her eyes, taking a sip of her wine. "Oh, that old junk. I was decluttering. We need the space in the cottage for the storage boxes." "This isn't junk," I whispered, my hand trembling. "This is my life." "It's Meadow Mac," she said dismissively, turning back to the TV. "It's scrap. You don't look at them anyway. They're just dust collectors. Honestly, you should thank me." I stepped forward. "Go back to your room," she said, waving a hand at me without looking. The front door opened. My son, David, walked in. He was wearing his work suit, looking tired and beaten down by a job he hated. He saw me standing there, wet and shaking. He saw the mud on the carpet. He saw the look on Jessica's face. "Is that us?" he asked, his voice weak. "She threw my medals in the trash, David."
I said, looking him in the eye. David looked at his wife. He looked terrified. Is it true? He asked softly. It's just old stuff, David.
We can get him new ribbons. David looked back at me. I waited for him to speak. I waited for him to defend me. I waited for him to be the man I raised. Dad, he said, his shoulders slumping, just don't upset her, please. We can order replacements. I looked at him. The boy I taught to fish on the Columbia River. The man whose mortgage I paid off with my disability settlement 2 years ago because he was drowning in debt. I saw the cowardice in his eyes, a hollow, empty look that hurt more than the shrapnel still lodged in my hip. He wasn't my son anymore. He was a casualty of a different kind of war. Understood, I said. I turned and walked out. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. Strategic withdrawal is not surrender. It is simply a change of tactics. I went back to the cottage. I locked the door. I took the metals to the bathroom sink. I used an old toothbrush and warm water, scrubbing the mud from the crevices of the star, treating it with the reverence of a holy relic. I laid the sodden photograph on a towel to dry, smoothing the wrinkles with my thumb. Then I went to my closet. I pulled out the footlocker at the bottom, hidden under a pile of wool blankets. Jessica hadn't found this yet. It was locked with a heavy padlock. I dialed in the combination, the date of the Tet offensive. Click. I opened the lid. The smell of canvas and gun oil drifted up. Inside was a satchel phone, an old, heavy satellite unit that still held a charge, and next to it, a leather-bound address book. I picked up the book. The pages were yellowed, filled with names of men who were long dead. I flipped to the letter S. Sterling, Marcus, Lieutenant. I picked up the phone. I extended the antenna. I dialed the number. It rang twice. Pentagon, General Sterling's office. A crisp voice answered. Tell Marcus it's Top, I said, my voice steady. There was a pause. A long silence. Then a click as the line was transferred. The voice hadn't changed in 20 years. It was deeper, maybe, rougher around the edges, but it was the same voice. General Marcus Sterling, 4 stars, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the man who advised the president on nuclear strategy, but once, 30 years ago, he was just a terrified 22-year-old lieutenant I had dragged out of a burning Humvee in Fallujah while insurgents fired on us from the rooftops. Top, he asked, where the hell have you been? I'm in Seattle, I said. A shed.
I need a favor, Marcus. I cut him off. I need an extraction. Name it, he said. No hesitation, no questions. That's loyalty. Not yet, I said. I need to confirm the intel first. Top, Marcus said, his tone shifting to command. Not physical, I said. But they're trying to erase me, Marcus. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end. I'll have a team there in 4 hours, he said. No, I said. Wait for my signal. I need to get the evidence. Roger that, Marcus said. I hung up. I waited until midnight. The lights in the main house went dark. I put on my dark raincoat. I slipped out of the cottage. I moved through the garden, sticking to the shadows, my feet remembering the silent step of a patrol. I entered the main house through the back door David always forgot to lock. I moved through the kitchen, silent as a ghost. I went to the study. Jessica's laptop was open on the desk. She was careless, arrogant. I sat down. The screen was black. I tapped the spacebar. It asked for a password. I tried her birthday. Access granted. I opened her email. I started scrolling. It was liquidation. There were dozens of emails. Chains with collectors. eBay listings. For sale. Authentic silver star. Vietnam era. Named recipient. Starting bid. $500. For sale. Purple Hard X2. Vintage. She wasn't throwing them away because they were junk. She was staging a loss so she could sell the replacements she planned to order from the government. She was selling my blood for pocket change. But then I found something worse. I opened it. There was a draft of a document. Medical power of attorney. Competency waiver. There was an email chain with a doctor named Dr. Eris. Dr. Eris. If we can demonstrate episodes of aggression or confusion, the court will grant a conservatorship. Jessica. He yelled at me today. I can say he was threatening. We need to move him to the state facility by next month. I stared at the screen. She was planning to declare me senile.
She was planning to lock me away in a state home, a warehouse for the forgotten, so she could sell the roof over my head to pay for a marble countertop. And David knew. He was CC'd on the emails. I felt a coldness settle in my chest that had nothing to do with the rain. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a flash drive. I copied the emails. I copied the listings. I took photos of the screen with my burner phone. I wiped the history. I closed the laptop.
I moved back through the house, out the door, and into the night. I went back to my cottage. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, polishing the silver star with a soft cloth until it gleamed in the moonlight. The grief was gone. The PTSD that usually haunted my nights, the faces of the dead, the sound of the choppers, it was all silent. In its place was the cold, hard clarity of a mission. I picked up the satchel phone. I dialed Marcus back. "Change of plans, General," I said when he answered. "It's not just an extraction." "Understood, Top," Marcus replied. I asked. "Full dress," Marcus said. I closed the phone. I looked at my uniform hanging in the closet, the Class A greens. I hadn't worn them in years. Tomorrow, the neighborhood was going to learn exactly who was living in the garden shed. And Jessica was going to learn that you don't throw a soldier's life in the mud without getting dirty yourself. The sun in Seattle can be a liar. It shines bright and cheerful, painting the world in high-definition color, while hiding the fact that the ground beneath your feet is still cold, damp, and unforgiving. I stood at the window of my cottage, sweating in my Class A uniform. The wool was heavy, tight across shoulders that had broadened with age and narrowed with neglect. The mothballs clung to the fabric, a scent that fought with the smell of cheap champagne wafting from the main garden. Outside, Jessica's world was in full bloom. The lawn was manicured to a golf course precision. White linens fluttered on round tables. Women in floral dresses laughed with their heads thrown back, their teeth white and sharp. Men in polo shirts held condensation-slicked beers, discussing interest rates and property values. It was a perfect Saturday afternoon, a perfect stage for a perfect lie. I touched the medals on my chest, the Silver Star, the Purple Hearts, the National Defense Service Medal. They were heavy. They pulled at the fabric of my jacket, a physical weight that anchored me to a time when honor wasn't just a word you used to sell a house. I had polished them until my fingers cramped. I had pinned them exactly according to regulation, measuring the distance with a ruler I kept in my toolbox. I checked my watch. 13:58 hours, 2 minutes to target.
Through the glass, I saw Jessica break away from a cluster of women. She looked toward the cottage, her smile dropping instantly, replaced by a scowl that etched deep lines around her mouth. She marched across the lawn, her heels aerating the soil I had tilled for her. She didn't knock. She threw the door open, letting the bright, painful sunlight spill into my dim sanctuary. "David!" she hissed, her voice low so the guests wouldn't hear. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. She looked me up and down with open disgust. "You look like a costume party reject," she sneered. "Take that off. Stay inside. Do not come out. You'll scare the guests. I told the HOA president you were resting." I adjusted my tie in the mirror. My hands were steady. "I'm expecting company," I said. My voice was calm. It was the calm of a man who has checked the perimeter and found it secure. Jessica laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "Who? The mailman? No one is coming to see you, old man. David is embarrassed enough as it is. We don't need you wandering around looking like a relic. Stay." She poked a finger into my chest, right next to the Silver Star. "If you ruin this party," she whispered, "I will have you in the state home by Monday morning." I looked at her finger, then I looked at her eyes. "I understand perfectly," I said. She huffed, turning on her heel and slamming the door behind her. I watched her walk back to the party, smoothing her dress, transforming instantly back into the charming hostess. She picked up a glass of wine, laughing at a joke she hadn't heard. I checked my watch, 13:59 hours. I waited. The vibration started in the floorboards. It wasn't a car engine. It was deeper. It was a resonance that traveled up through the foundation of the cottage, rattling the teacups on my small table. It grew louder, a low rumble like distant thunder rolling in from the mountains. The guests in the garden stopped talking. They looked up at the clear blue sky, confused. They looked at the street. The wine in their glasses began to tremble, ripples spreading across the surface. Then they turned the corner. It wasn't just a car. It was an invasion. 2 black government SUVs, massive and armored, with flags snapping on the fenders. They were flanked by 4 military police motorcycles, their lights flashing blue and red, silent but blindingly bright in the afternoon sun.
They moved in perfect formation, a phalanx of steel and authority.
They pulled up to the curb, blocking the driveway, blocking the street, dominating the space with a physical presence that made the luxury sedans of the neighbors look like toys. The guests gasped. A woman dropped her plate of canapés. Jessica dropped her glass. It shattered on the patio pavers, crystal and wine exploding outward. The doors of the lead SUV opened. 2 soldiers in full dress blues stepped out. They moved with a stiffness and precision that made them look like statues come to life. They marched to the back door of the SUV and opened it. General Marcus Sterling stepped out. He was a giant of a man, 6'4", his chest a solid wall of ribbons that told the story of 3 wars. 4 silver stars gleamed on his shoulders, catching the sun. He put on his cover, pulling the brim low. He adjusted his white gloves. He walked up the driveway. He didn't look at the guests. He didn't look at the manicured lawn. He didn't look at Jessica. He looked straight ahead, his gaze fixed on the cottage. Behind him, 4 military police officers marched in formation, their boots hitting the pavement in perfect unison. Clack, clack, clack. Jessica recovered from her shock. The color drained from her face, but her entitlement remained intact. She ran to intercept them, her heels clicking frantically on the stone path. "Shh!" she shouted, waving her hands. "You can't park here. You're blocking the street. This is a private party." General Sterling stopped. He stopped 5 feet from her. He looked down at her from behind his aviator sunglasses. He slowly removed them. His eyes were the color of cold steel. "I am General Marcus Sterling, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, United States Army," he boomed. His voice didn't need to be loud. It projected without effort, a baritone that silenced the wind, the birds, and the entire neighborhood. Jessica blinked, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. There's no one here like that. It's just us and my father-in-law. He's—" "Step aside, ma'am," Sterling said. He didn't wait for her to move. He walked past her as if she were a shrub that needed pruning. I opened the cottage door. I stepped out onto the porch. The sun hit my face. I stood tall, ignoring the screaming pain in my knees, ignoring the tremor in my hands. I locked my knees. I straightened my spine. I snapped a salute. It was crisp. It was perfect. It was the salute of a man who knows exactly who he is.
General Sterling stopped at the base of the steps. He looked up at me. A smile touched the corner of his mouth. Gone in an instant. "Sergeant Major," Sterling said. He returned the salute slowly, holding it for a long beat. "Permission granted, General," I said. Sterling dropped the salute. He walked up the steps. He didn't shake my hand. He embraced me. It was a bear hug that smelled of starch, gun oil, and loyalty. "You look good, Mac," he whispered in my ear. "You look old, Marcus," I whispered back. He pulled away, gripping my shoulders. He turned to the crowd. He turned to Jessica, who was now flanked by the MPs, looking small and terrified. "This man," Sterling announced. The guests flinched. "This man," Sterling said, gesturing to me with a gloved hand, "is Sergeant Major Thomas McAllister. He is a recipient of the Silver Star. He saved 12 lives in the Ashau Valley in 1968. He pulled me out of a burning vehicle in Fallujah when I was a lieutenant." Sterling paused. He let the silence stretch. He looked at Jessica. Jessica froze. She took a step back. I didn't—" Sterling snapped his fingers. One of the MPs stepped forward. He was holding a tablet. He turned it toward the guests. He turned it toward the HOA president. The screen showed an eBay listing. Authentic Silver Star, Vietnam era, named recipient. Seller, Jesse Vance Real Estate. Stolen Valor Act of 2013, Sterling said. Trafficking in counterfeit military goods. Theft of veteran assets. He scrolled the tablet. He showed an email. From Jessica Vance, subject, competency hearing. We need to get the old man declared incompetent by Friday. And we have the emails, Sterling continued, regarding the competency hearing you were rigging. Conspiracy to commit fraud. The words hung in the air like smoke. David stepped forward. He was sweating, wiping his forehead with a cocktail napkin. Now, wait a minute, General. This is a family matter. I stepped down from the porch. I walked past the General. I stood in front of my son. Not anymore, son, I said. I pulled a manila folder from my jacket. I handed it to the lead MP. This is the evidence, I said. Bank transfers, pension theft. It's all there. The guests were whispering. The HOA president,
A woman who prided herself on knowing everything about everyone was taking photos with her phone. Jessica looked at her friends, her eyes pleading for support, for someone to say this was a mistake.
But they were backing away. They were stepping off the grass, moving toward their cars. The social capital she had hoarded so carefully, the reputation she had built on lies, evaporated in seconds. "Mrs. Vance?" the MP said, stepping closer to her. Jessica started to cry. It was an ugly sound, high and shrill. "David, do something!" David looked at me. He looked at the general. He looked at the MPs. He looked at the life he had built on my back. The house, the cars, the status. It was all crumbling. He looked at his wife, and for the first time in 10 years, I saw him make a choice. He said nothing. He stepped back. He let go of her arm. "Pack your bag, Mac," Sterling said, clapping me on the back. "The car is waiting. I have a guest suite at the base with your name on it. And the JAG lawyers are very interested in reviewing your trust fund documents." I walked back into the cottage. I picked up the one bag I had packed that morning. It was light. I didn't need much. I walked out. I walked past Jessica, who was now arguing with the MPs, her mascara running, her voice panicked. "You can't do this. I have a showing tomorrow." I walked past David, who was staring at his shoes, unable to meet my eyes. I stopped in front of my son. "You let her throw me in the mud," I said softly. "You watched her do it." David flinched. "You aren't a man, David," I said. I walked down the driveway. I climbed into the back of the SUV. The leather seats were soft. The air conditioning was cool. It smelled new. General Sterling climbed in beside me. He closed the door, shutting out the noise of Jessica screaming. "Where to?" he asked. I looked out the tinted window. I saw the neighbors watching. I saw the for sale sign that Jessica had hidden in the garage, waiting for me to be gone. "Anywhere but here," I said. The convoy pulled away. The lights flashed, reflecting off the windows of the silent houses. I looked back one last time. I saw Jessica crying in the center of her ruined party, isolated, exposed. I saw the mud on her white carpet where the MPs had walked. I touched the silver star on my chest. It was clean. It was bright. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. For the first time in 10 years, I wasn't behind enemy lines. I wasn't a burden. I wasn't a guest in my own life. I was home.